dance out in the cold dark night. Screams echo loud, no wrong, no right. Rescue calls flash blood red sky. Spirits linger, waiting not to die. Ghosts on the line, they whisper and wail. Fingers reaching out, pale as they fail.
Good morning, everybody. This is Colleen. I'm with Emergency Encounters, and I'm here with my co-hosts,
Hey,
Mad
Mud
Max
Lover here.
and Mudlover.
Great morning.
Ah, you know what?
How's everybody doing today?
This is a great day. I mean, it was nice and cool this morning. It was hot last night.
Yes, it
I-
was.
Yeah.
I'm cheap, and I try not to sleep with the AC on as much as I can, and open the windows, but it was a little uncomfortable last night. I don't know. Maybe it was all the beer I drank at dinner.
Maybe.
I don't know. And a little bit of beer when I came home. I don't know. Anyway, it was a nice evening, but
It
cool.
was.
What's our Mad Max? What's our topic today?
So today, just recently in the news, Alcatraz has been coming up, and they want to refurbish it, or that's what word says, that they want to refurbish it and make it a prison again, a functioning prison. So I thought about kind of doing some background on Alcatraz. I've never been there. I've always wanted to, but maybe when I'm a grown up, we'll be able to go back and go to Alcatraz. But Alcatraz is actually it's a rocky island in the San Francisco Bay. The island occupies about 22 acres, and it's located about a mile and a half offshore. The island actually had little vegetation, and it was a seabird habitat when it was explored in 1775 by Lieutenant Juan Manuel de Ayala, who named it the Isle de los Alcatraz, which means it's the Isle of Pelicans.
No.
Originally, the Alcatraz was gifted to Pio Pico. He was the 10th governor of the state of California. And Pio Pico actually was, before he was the governor of California, California was actually called Alta California. And he ended up in 1846. Julian workmen overtook the island with the intention of building a lighthouse there. Now, understand, this island is very strategic. It is situated right in the middle of the bay, and at that time, the concern was to protect that area from the British and the Confederate Navy, so they could not come into the bay. And as we all know, that area is known for gold and everything, but it was a stronghold coming into the bay.
I had no idea
Um,
when we were talking about this topic about that history. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Definitely.
And the funny thing about the way it's situated, it's right at the mouth of the bay. So it's very strategic, and whoever came up with it was pretty smart. Let's see, it was sold in 1849 to the U.S. government. It was the site of the first lighthouse in 1854 on the coast of California.
I didn't
So,
know
which
that
is
either.
kind of interesting. Go ahead.
I didn't know that either. I had that it was the
Yeah.
first lighthouse.
It's the first lighthouse in the state of California, which is kind of cool, in 1854.
Definitely.
Let's see.
There's the lighthouse in this image.
There you
Can you
go.
see my cursor?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
After it in give me a second. On the coast of California, after buildings were erected on the island, and the first permanent army detachment was garrisoned there in 1859. Garrison just means that they were stationed there, and that was their post. In 1861, the island was designated as a resident for miscreant soldiers. What a great word, miscreant. That's pretty awesome, I think.
There.
After the war, Alcatraz took on a dual duty. One was to protect the harbor of San Francisco and to continue building ever expanding army prison. For 20 years, they used convict labor to build that prison. They tore it down, they rebuilt it, they tore it down and rebuilt it a couple of times.
Wow.
Shortly after the fort was officially turned into disciplinary barracks, Army prisoners constructed the world's largest and most modern, for its time, cell house atop the island became the first occupants. So kind of ironic that the guys that were out there building it became the first occupants of it.
Oh wow.
Well,
So-
I mean, manual
Wow.
labor was an issue then, or a deal then. We had chain gangs and everything else, right?
Exactly.
So-
Exactly. And it's kind of interesting. Among the first rules as a military prison, this is kind of a partial list of the rules that they would, they had to live by. Remember, they're out in the middle of a bay. Number one, the usual allowance of straw would be issued to everybody. I'm not quite sure what the usual allowance is, but yeah. Every prisoner would bathe his whole body in either tepid or cold water once a week, unless the doctor said different.
Oh,
Wow.
Again, I'm not quite sure how that worked out either. Food, clothing, bedding, and shelter and medical attendance was sufficient to preserve health of prisoners. And unfortunately, in jail and in a common setting, one person gets sick and it pretty much just runs throughout the whole population. We used to use the term kennel cough because one inmate would get it and it would just run rampant. So I can imagine now that they have a lot more medical guidance and antibiotics to control it, but interesting. I always find that stuff interesting. Later prisoners included 19 Hopi Indians from the Arizona Territory who passively resisted government attempts to assimilate them. So if you don't assimilate, guess what? You're going to Alcatraz.
doesn't that sound like Star Trek, the Borg?
Can you imagine? So
my
these poor
God.
guys from friggin' Arizona have no idea what's going on. They were loaded up on transport and they were shipped out onto this.
Wow.
They
Yeah,
have no understanding.
Yeah, that
They
would-
don't have any understanding of what we're
no, not at all.
doing. No.
Not at all.
Oh.
So these poor guys,
Poor
I'm
people.
like, at least there was 19 of them.
Yeah, they were
Can you
together at
imagine-
least.
Yeah. Can you imagine one or two and then one dies?
No.
No.
So yeah, pretty interesting.
History is not always fun.
No.
No.
Uh,
No, it isn't.
There were some American soldiers fighting the Philippines who had joined the Filipino cause in 1900. 1907, the island was designated as the Pacific branch of the United States military prison. So for a while, I guess they were just running rogue, and then they decided that in 1907, they're going to lay some other rules down. 1934, the Department of Justice, because we're the government, we're here to help,
I'm here to help.
acquired the prison and transformed it into a United States penitentiary at Alcatraz. So that would be the stuff that we know that we're used to seeing out there. Ironically, the first 32 prisoners were former Army soldiers that were left when the military vacated the island. So, we're going to go ahead and build
You
this.
and
Guess
you.
what? This is where you live.
Wow.
You're saying we're out. So, and like I said, there's been a lot of talk about getting it back online, and I don't. I've only seen it. I've never been there, but I can't imagine what kind of work it would take. The undertaking is incredible there.
One of the reasons why they removed the prisoners is because they use salt water in the mixing of the concrete, and the buildings are crumbling. They're literally
Oh,
falling down. And then you have a lot of tectonic activity. So it's
sure.
just not strong. It's not built to today's standards for earthquake. Um, the cement is like turning to powder in some areas and just rapidly falling apart. They'd have to completely remove the buildings, which would be a big undertaking for lead paint, base paint and asbestos and lead pipes
Mhm.
and everything else, and then take the buildings down and rebuild it. And I mean, it can be done, certainly. And nobody, because Kim's going to go into some of the stuff that has happened with people trying to escape, and you're not getting off that thing. Once you're there, you're not getting off.
No,
You're not going to survive.
I
So,
can't. Unfortunately, I didn't do any research on if I know that some of the guards stayed there, but I do know that some of the guards made the ferry trip when it was time for them to go to work. So I was going to look into that and completely forgot about that. But there have been rumors that there are tunnels down below Alcatraz, and there was a rumor that there was a a tunnel all the way from the beach all the
mm,
way down to the actual prison. Now, I would not want to be a guy that's digging a friggin' tunnel that long because that would be incredible to me.
I
But that's
believe,
a rumor. I can't substantiate that though.
yeah, I find that hard to believe for the depths of the water there, the
Right.
technology at the time. I find that a little hard to believe, but I mean,
Well, you never know.
you never know. I don't know. That seems like a huge undertaking.
Right.
So, yeah,
And
for what
yeah,
we needed it for. Slap up some buildings, call it good, and walk away. Yeah, dang it.
exactly.
And the thing is, if okay, I've been there many, many times because that was like our school field trip for like right before the end of the school year because the weather was a little better. Not great. San Francisco, everybody's like, "Ooh, San Francisco." Now I would never go, but anyway, back
No.
then, we went and it was safe, and we'd always go to Pier 39, I think, um, to all of the shops and the stuff like that. We'd get on the Red Clipper line and go out to Alcatraz. It was like a yearly event for our school because I grew up 3 hours to the east up in the mountains, and so we've been there many, many times. And it used to be really cool because you had a park ranger with your class or with your group for a private tour. And so we
Wow.
went through the whole building, and I mean, it would be like a 4 or 5 hour tour of
That's
Alcatraz, then you
nice.
get back on the Clipper and you'd go back in and have dinner. And but now it's just throngs of people. The last time I was there was 5, 6, 7 years ago. And my dad and I decided to go, and he gets seasick, like, just thinking about water. So I don't know how he made it over there, but he did wanna go see it the first and last time, and it was just probably, I wanna say there was 2, 3,000 people there.
Oh,
It was just mobbed. You couldn't
it's
hear
no
each other
fun.
talk from the ec it wasn't it's not the same, and
No.
but I remember distinctly them showing us some of the buildings you couldn't even go into anymore because they're condemned because of the the whole structure's falling apart, and it's cold. It's rarely warm there.
Mm.
So it's San Francisco in general, right? I mean, you have to wait for the
Uh,
fog to burn off. It's cold in the mornings. It's
Mhm.
cold at night. I mean, Candlestick Park is not that far from there. You always took your down jacket to go to a baseball game because it's cold in the summer. So, what a miserable, I mean, other than beautiful views,
Yeah.
it's not a charming place. Yeah.
yeah, and that's a bad. I can't even imagine. There was just being an inmate or prisoner, as they refer to him. Um, you know, At least if you're in a jail or a prison somewhere else, you can look outside and see land. But you're in the middle of a bay. There's no way. There's no way. I mean, it's a mile and a half swimming, and there's a lot of stuff in that bay. They say there's sharks in there. There's whatever. No, no, no. I don't want to play
Yeah,
that game.
this picture doesn't do it justify how far you are to shore. Shore's a
Right.
distance. What is it, a mile or more, I think?
It's a
And it doesn't
mile
seem
and
like
a half.
mile and a half. And everybody's like,
Yeah.
oh, I can swim a mile. A good swimmer can certainly swim a mile. That's not a problem. The problem is here at the currents. The
Yeah.
currents are treacherous in here, and it's not far from the great white shark breeding ground of Bodega Bay.
Mhm.
So the great whites in here, they're everywhere. And the currents will get you. If the currents don't get you, those sharks are going to get you. Or the cold, it is such cold water that you're going to get hypothermia quick.
Yeah,
And
and the want to get out, I get it, but throw all that other stuff on there, and the technology that they had back then, they didn't have dry suits, they didn't have a support system, they didn't have any kind of apparatus. They talked about, and Mud Lover will go into that a little bit more, but they talked about um, how they built their boats. There was a movie out probably about 30 years ago, and it was called Escape from Alcatraz. And they talked about how they glued together rain jackets and they stashed them down there on the beach underneath, where they couldn't see them. And I'm thinking to myself, no, I don't think so. I can't even imagine that. They have done some research out there recently, uh, and they did reveal the existence of tunnels and buildings beneath Alcatraz. Now, we're not talking a tunnel that we spoke about earlier. I think that they had tunnels from one end of the island to the other end of the
Mhm.
island. And I'm
Yeah.
sure that would make a lot of sense, just for transporting knuckleheads or moving moving supplies back and forth. But the structures they're not part of the original design. They were discovered using ground penetrating radar,
wow.
and the finding indicate that the prison was built in the 20th century, and it was constructed over what we talked about earlier, the pre-existing fortification. The dungeon that they call now was actually what they called the Citadel, and it's underground. That's where they did store a lot of their stuff. Granted, it was ammo and supplies and stuff like that. So that's down below the actual prison, and that's on the old fort. So there's a detailed look. Archaeologists have used techniques to do that, looking for the tunnels. Um, the prison was built over the existing fortifications, with workers constructing a prison on top of the earlier military structures. The dungeon, or what it was called, that was where the servants' quarters were, storage, solitary confinement. So imagine you're going to solitary confinement, which solitary confinement is usually a cell. We used to have, it's just a regular cell, but it had no windows. You had no TV. It's the hole for a reason. This is actually a hole. They went down
Wow.
underneath the prison,
Wow.
and prison's not a fun place anyway, right? I don't. Yeah, I don't think I do. I'm too pretty for prison, actually. I think, but they're going into a hole. I mean, that's it. No light. Probably had a hole to do your business in, and you got whatever food they sent you. And yeah, I mean, I've heard stories about other prisons where guys were in the hole and they were forgotten about.
Yeah.
You know, you have you have shift change, and you didn't do your log, but back in the day you didn't do a log. And where's Bill? Jeez, I don't know. Didn't we put him in the hole a month ago? And this poor guy's
Can you
done.
imagine? Oh my
Wow.
God.
I can't. And it's your sleep rhythm is all jacked up because it's dark all the time.
All the
And
time.
they've done
Wow.
studies and had people in these dark rooms, and they go mad.
Yeah, they do.
Your senses. You're trying to sleep, and get something crawling over your face, crawling in your ears. No, I don't.
Mm-mm.
No,
No.
no, I'm good.
No.
Yeah.
It says that the structures are they're very well preserved, which makes sense. They're down below, and they're located relatively close to the surface, so they're not that deep. Not like very very deep, but I imagine that they're good 30 or 40 feet deep. But the tunnels discovered were not part of any planned escape or anything that the inmates could use to escape.
Mm.
So, like I said, who knows? There could be tunnels in there that went from one corner of the bay to the other bay. I don't know. But according to the research that I found, there was only the tunnels are just to move stuff back and forth. So,
Wow.
pretty interesting, I thought.
Heck
Yeah, that is interesting. It's the there's a picture here. Oops. Okay. So to talk about how everything is deteriorating, when was the prison built?
So the active prison started in the early 1900s. They
Yeah,
started working
okay.
on it then.
So we have a lot of buildings that are a whole lot older than that in this country, right? It's just,
Yeah.
yeah. And because they did what they did, I'm trying to find this particular image to share it with you, because they
I'm
mixed.
sorry. They started building there in 1859.
Okay.
So that's a
Yeah.
long time ago.
But the East Coast, I mean, we have buildings from the 1700s, right? I mean, that's just, but this was the warden's house. And
Wow.
it's a shell. I mean, it's just, first of all, you have constant fog and wetness and everything else, so the wood's going to rot.
Yeah.
But then you have the structure itself, the concrete structure, which is crumbling and giving away. And yeah, they're just not going to, I mean, they can't bring this stuff back.
Yeah. That's so
Unfortunately,
sad.
you're correct. And
God.
not only
So,
that, you got the wind. The wind is just,
oh,
always beating on that stuff,
kind of like
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Constantly.
Let's see. All right. Mud Lover, what do you got?
I got a few people that have tried to escape. There's so many, and I tried to hit on a couple that might be lesser known because we've all heard about, the famous ones. So the first one I'm touching on is a gentleman named Joseph Bowers. He was the first known prisoner to try and escape. And this was I'll get there. I'm going to have to read because I don't retain. So, so it's not clear if he tried to attempt suicide or if he was actually trying to escape. To show how close he was to one of the first prisoners, he was inmate 210. He was
Wow.
born in 1897.
I have a picture of him I can put up here.
Oh, nice. So he got a 25-year term for postal mail robbery of $16.38.
Oh my God.
I know it, right?
Oh my God. That's insanity. I mean,
Yeah.
he must have been a bad guy and done a lot of other stuff before he got popped for this, but come on.
Yeah.
Oh.
So his thing was he wasn't able to find work. He claims that his parents were part of a traveling circus, and he was born in Texas, and his parents abandoned him, so he was raised by the circus people. He was never able to establish citizenship because he lost all contact with the people that were raising him. So
Wow.
he arrived on Alcatraz in September of 1934. He was considered unpredictable and at a high risk, resulting from being emotionally unstable. Let's see.
Blame him. I'd be emotionally I'm emotionally unstable now.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, take a step back. He was first at McVale Island, which is in Washington State. And that's where he was considered unpredictable and at a high risk. And then they transferred him over to Alcatraz. He attempted multiple suicide attempts, and the doctors didn't think he was really serious. He just kind of wanted attention. So they did a lot of studies on him. They felt that his attempts were really weak and they were theatrical. And he was not actually as crazy as he portrayed to be. So the reports, that's what the reports from the doctors. He was reviewed by two separate psych doctors. And they both came up with the same conclusion. So in April of 1936, he had like a little part-time job in prison, and he was on incinerator duty. And for some unknown reason, the three thoughts are: one was it was attempted suicide, two, he was wanting to go up and feed the seagulls, or three, he was getting trash. So what happened was he climbed up on a garbage can that was wedged between the chain link fence and the building, and he was ignoring the orders to halt. He just kept climbing. And so the guards fired upon him and he passed. But ironically, when he fell on the side of freedom. So when he passed away, he was not in the prison. He was on the freedom side.
Oh,
So I thought that was kind of an interesting story.
it's sad.
Yeah.
Just the circumstances around what happened. Yeah. Jeez.
Yeah. So my next.
And back then, those guys, you talked about them being evaluated by a psychiatrist or psychologist or whatever. I don't know what they, would have done. Are you crazy? Yeah, no. Oh, okay, he's not crazy. What was their evaluation technique?
Yeah.
What did they beat him into submission and tell him, okay, I'm crazy? I feel bad for that stuff.
Yeah. And the site I used for my research on him, it does have the psych doctor's write-up.
Okay.
So I just took a little bit from the write-up for my presentation. But yeah, there's his whole write-up is on that.
Wow.
It's Alcatraz history. So that was, very interesting. My next person is kind of well-known, but still kind of an interesting story. This is Robert Stroud, also known as the Birdman. He was inmate 594. So initially, he was sent to a prison for murdering a bartender for not paying a prostitute that he pimped out in Alaska. This was in 1909. He ended up taking the gentleman's wallet to make sure that him and his prostitute both got paid. In 1911, he was convicted of manslaughter and sent to McNeil Island, and was known to be violent and difficult to manage. Kind of looks crazy.
Yeah, he does. He doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got a look to him.
It's got those crazy eyes.
Yep.
Let's let's see, he received an additional 6 months, and then he was transferred to Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary for being hostile, but also McNeil was becoming overcrowded. So they're like, well, you can just go away. So they sent him to Leavenworth. We're done with you. In 1916, he was convicted of first-degree murder of a prison guard when he was not allowed to visit with his brother. His brother came to visit. So, yeah.
Yeah, this guy had no, there's no boundaries with him at all.
No, none. His mother desperately was pleading for his life because they were going to sentence him to death row. So she pleaded and pleaded, and eventually in 1920, President Woodrow Wilson changed it to life without parole, and then that was due to his unpredictable and violent outbursts. The wardens directed that he be permanently in segregation to live out his sentence. So he was at Leavenworth for 30 years, and he had found an injured canary in the wreck area. They let him breed and use the bird for research because they figured it'd just be a productive use of his time, and he would leave everybody alone. He ended up writing 2 books that referenced the canary's behaviors and diseases, and developed a marketing medicine to help with the bird diseases, but they never knew if what he developed actually worked, but it did lead to others creating these vaccines for birds that did work.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he was actually proactive after all was said and done, which is crazy.
Right? Yeah. Let's see. After several years of him doing his research and experimenting, they discovered that he was using some of this equipment as stills to make alcohol.
What up to?
So at that point, he lost quite a few privileges after that.
Everybody's got to have a side hustle.
That's right. So
That's pretty funny.
Right? In 1942, he was then transferred to Alcatraz, where he spent 11 of those years in the prison hospital.
Why was he in the hospital? Do you know?
He was in the hospital. I'm pretty sure I should write.
Was it like for psychiatric reasons, I wonder?
No, he was ill.
Oh.
Yeah, the bird
That's
flu.
okay if you can't
bird
find
flu.
it. But that's,
I
bird
would have
flu?
wrote it down if I saw it, and I don't.
He was the first case. Yeah.
Bird flu.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but then in 1959, he was transferred to the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. And he was found by one of his close friends, Morton Sobel, in 1963, deceased in his room. A little fun fact on that is he was never allowed to see the movie The Birdman of Alcatraz. And it's kind of weird because I've never seen the movie, but it says they portrayed him as mild-mannered and humane in the movie.
He was not, apparently, huh? He was isn't that interesting? I mean, creative license and all of that, but at least be somewhat accurate.
Yeah.
In later years, he seems like the kind of guy that he evolved into this Birdman or nice person, but let's not worry about the guard that he killed or that friggin' guy up in Alaska that he killed and robbed but he's a good guy. He's a good guy now.
Yeah, because he did a few good things, maybe for birds.
Birds,
but,
yeah.
But kudos to the prison system for figuring out that if we allow him to do this, maybe he'll remain calm for a while he's doing his research and talking about birds and writing about birds, anything to keep him occupied so he's not violent.
Yeah,
That's a good thing.
definitely.
So,
Totally.
yeah,
Well, he wasn't creating hate and discontent when he was working with his birds. So that's one
Yeah,
less person you got to worry about.
exactly.
exactly.
Give him his
Yeah.
canaries and a sketch pad and let him go.
Heck
Holy
yeah.
moly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So my last person is Charles Hopkins. He is for sure the last living person that spent time on Alcatraz, and there's possibly a second gentleman who I began to research to see if he was still with us, but I was not able to find anything. And his name I have in here somewhere. But the reason I'm bringing him up is he was interviewed after it was brought up that Trump would like to reopen Alcatraz. So they thought it would be interesting to interview someone who actually spent some time out there. And the interview was conducted by BBC. So he spent 3 years there. In 1955 is when he arrived for a 17-year sentence. But 3 years at Alcatraz, he mostly remembers it being deathly quiet. He is actually 93 years old right now and living in Florida. Oh, and the other possible survivor is William Baker. So he was mentioned.
I was going to try to
Mr.
bring up this
Oh,
this
okay.
guy's photo, the guy that was just interviewed. This is his Alcatraz photo. What Charles Hopkins is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
You know why that it was so quiet there? The reason it was quiet is the only time inmates could talk was in rec time when they were outside, and in mealtime. That was it. Those were the only times they could talk. They couldn't, they couldn't talk while they were locked down. They couldn't talk while they were in
Oh,
cells. They couldn't do anything. They could
wow.
only talk um, in mealtime and outside rec time. Also, there were another rule that was there is as an inmate or a convict or whatever they talked to prisoner, they could never have any money
Mm.
because that way they could barter.
Right.
So, and I'm sure that when Birdman was doing his thing, making alcohol, I'm sure there was a lot of other type bartering that went on. But yeah, that was one of their rules. It was they were not allowed to have money. So that would just think about that. If you are not allowed to have money as an adult, that takes you down a level. You know what I mean? I mean,
Yeah.
we all know money it talks and money walks, and that's the way it is. But if you're not allowed to have money, that's one of those things where it takes you down. And if you're not allowed to talk, that you'd be disciplined by going to the hole like we
Oh,
talked about earlier. Yeah, no,
wow.
I would be.
No.
I
Yeah, you
would.
would.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it would. Yeah,
You'd explode.
I would. Top of my
Yeah.
head would just explode if
Implode.
I can't talk. I even talk in my sleep. I have to say
Wow.
something.
Oh my
And you
gosh.
So,
okay, who else do you have there, Mud
Well, I
Lover?
have a little bit more on Mr. Hopkins. He had made friends with some gangsters and actually once helped them with an unsuccessful escape. Yeah, let's see. I'll get into that in just a moment. But he was transferred to Alcatraz in 1955, and he remembers it being clean but barren. Few distractions, no radios, and very few books. And the only thing you could do is walk in circles in your cell or do push-ups because that was it. So he kept busy by getting a job cleaning Alcatraz by sweeping and buffing the floors. He said he still managed to get in trouble and spent many days in the D block, solitary confinement.
Wow.
Yeah. So a little bit about the escape that failed. He helped Forrest Tucker, I guess he was a notorious bank robber, try to escape. He stole hacksaw blades, which they used to cut the prison bars in the basement kitchen. I guess the guards ended up finding some of these blades in other prisoners' cells, and those prisoners got in trouble, and eventually Mr. Hopkins also got in trouble. So after that, they ended up ramping up security quite a bit. He said in 1958 when he left, security was so tight you could not even breathe.
Wow.
He also said in all there were 14 attempts of trying to escape that involved 36 inmates. So his thought on reopening this prison, he thinks it would be too expensive. And he says, and when he was there, the sewage drained to the ocean.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to figure that out. Not to mention the building's conditions and whatnot. He thinks that it's mainly being thrown around as trying to get a point across that that the administration really wants to punish criminals and whatnot. So after he left Alcatraz, he was transferred to Springfield, Missouri. He was given psych meds that improved his behavior and helped him heal mental issues he had. He was finally released in 1963, working at a truck stop and then taking other odd jobs. And now he spends his time in Florida, where he has a daughter, and a grandson.
Wow.
He also ended up writing a book after years of reflection on his behavior as a youngster. And he said, "You wouldn't believe the trouble I caused them while I was there. I can see now, looking back, that I had problems." So,
Well, at least he recognizes it, and he got help for it,
yeah.
and hopefully he'll be, a good citizen, and now a decent role model for his kid and his grandkids. So
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
yeah,
Yeah.
shoot. Most of us screw up in our younger days, right? It's
Yeah.
Some people get caught and some people don't. And then whether or not you learn from those mistakes, that's
Yeah.
most of us do stupid stuff, really stupid stuff. I mean, not to the level of, hurting other people, but we do
Yeah.
stupid stuff. It's part of growing
Yeah.
up. So,
That's how
yeah,
you learn. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So I do
So,
have one quick little fun fact before I
yes.
turn it over. This is about Al Capone. I ended up on a little side rabbit hole that I didn't go too far down, but I just have a couple little fun facts. While it's not proven, there's a big rumor that the reason we have expiration dates on milk is because his niece became ill drinking sour milk. So he petitioned and did whatever he needed to do to get these dates on these milks. But while I was trying to research that, I discovered that the Capone boys figured out that they could use milk the way they were using alcohol. And since milk was legal, they bought a dairy farm and they inflated prices as though it was alcohol, but they made the prices go up, so they were able to make a fortune doing that. And that's where I ended my rabbit hole, because I didn't want to go down it. But I found that very
Wild.
interesting. Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
To think that maybe something good came out of Al Capone's history. Yeah.
Yeah.
Expiration dates on milk.
Yeah.
I wanted to share a few photos that I found online before I go into the paranormal portion
Yes.
of our talk.
Yeah.
So this is an active cell block, and you can see that there's not a lot of prisoners milling around. Everything is orderly. Everything is not what you see on TV of today's prisons, and maybe Mad Max, not your experience of working in these facilities, but it's like it looks quiet, doesn't it? Like
Yeah.
really, really quiet.
Well, you know
Yeah.
what? Like,
Eerie.
you got to remember back then, you had to tell these guys what to do. You governed these people. You know, these were not just a bunch of people going for a picnic. You know, you're looking like we talked about. You have murderers, you have psych inmates, you have. So you had to direct them, and you had to tell them what to do. And unless I can imagine if that place got overrun, you know, they use the term
Yeah,
if the monkeys take over the zoo, it's going to be a bad day.
yeah. Here's the cafeteria area, and it looks like you said, I think you said that one of the only places that they could have a conversation is during meals.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
and here's a picture of the active cafeteria, which it just blows my mind how much control they had over these guys. They were probably beaten to submission should they mouth back.
Well, if you look at that, they're going to that chow hall. You know, what's the first thing that you see with that guard there is a lockable door.
Mm.
Yeah.
So in that chow hall, if they decided to go off, you lock the door. You had staff more than likely was always by some sort of an exit. And, you know,
Mm.
they were able to lock themselves in or lock themselves out, you know, and if they couldn't handle what was going on, they would lock themselves out and let the
Wow.
inmates take care of business.
Mm.
That's
And
something
it's
I hadn't
unfortunate,
thought
like I
about.
said,
Yeah.
yeah. You know, and another, they talked about Al Capone in rec time when they could go out to the yard, they would play baseball. And
Oh,
Al
yeah.
Capone, when he was up, when he didn't want to play anymore, he would yank one over the fence and it would end up in the bay. And game was over, you know, and that was it. They were done for the day. So when he got tired and he didn't want to play, he would yank one over the fence, and that was it.
Wow. Um, they did have some prisoners were allowed to garden and maintain some of the gardens, and I'll just show you a picture. They're really quite stunning, and there's a lot of flowers there when you go now and you see it. These flowers still, these flower beds are still there, and they
Wow.
just obviously keep going. And there's historical photos of the prisoners maintaining this, and this was another thing that, keep them busy, keep them occupied. If they like to garden, let them garden, because this is the busy bee, right?
Right.
Keep them doing something, because if you're not allowed to talk, this would be where I'm at. Like, give me the plants, because otherwise, I don't know what I'm capable of if I can't do something. So I can't imagine that.
And imagine
Okay.
that was therapy for them as well. You
Exactly.
know,
Exactly.
they got
For certain people, I mean, we have all of us meditate in different ways. And for me, it's being with the animals and being by planting and being in my flower beds and stuff. So yeah, it's therapeutic for me. I might be listening to a podcast and not like meditation music, but that's my downtime.
Yeah.
So kind of wanted to go into some of the paranormal. I Like I said, I went many, many times. I probably every year of grammar school and 2 or 3 years of high school. So I've been there a lot.
Wow. Nice.
And because it's the place that you go right before the end of school, because that's when it got warmer. And then sometimes we actually did a second trip, at least to Pier 39 for Christmas shopping with our classes.
Oh,
Because there was
wow.
warehouses there that you could go in. There were warehouses before Temu and TikTok, right? You could go and all this crap would be coming in from China, and you could go get your mom of her 100th ashtray for 25 cents, So it's all that and buy your family Christmas presents and then go home. For $20, you could get everybody something, some trinket, and it was fun. But one of the visits to Alcatraz, I remember they locked us up. Now, it wasn't the whole like you described it, Mad Max. Because it wasn't underground, but it was solitaire in, I think it's D block. And so that must have been later. Like maybe the hole was first and then later. I'm not sure how this, but I remember they locked us all in there one at a time for 2 minutes. They timed it 2 minutes and they'd open the door. Cause like I said, it was private tours back then. And they could do that. And everybody had to be quiet while we were all locked in so we could see and understand
Wow.
the depth of the darkness and the depth of the quiet. You could hear your heartbeat,
Wow.
and it was spooky.
2 minutes,
There
2
are
minutes is a
That's a long time.
long time.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
I can't
So
imagine that.
yeah, so that was, I think, D block. And today people experience in cell 14D probably one of the most haunted areas of the prison. And this is apparently there's a story that an inmate was killed in the cell by himself. It was not suicide. It appeared to be murder. And he was screaming, he was pleading to get out, and he was under attack. And when they finally opened the door, he was murdered, and they could not figure out what happened. And some people attribute that to just all of the negative energy of the prison that attacked him. Like maybe he was,
Wow.
yeah, it was pretty interesting that people have then seen now different apparitions in that cell, that particular cell. So it's 14D. I don't know. I didn't experience that. I did experience kind of overwhelming dread and being empathic. You feel all of those feelings that those guys had in there, from anger and hostility to just weakness and dread. It was terrible. I didn't like it at all.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different phantom crying heard throughout the prison. If you're there, not with 2,000 people, you can actually hear some of this stuff. You can hear the sobbing, the cold spots, of course, everywhere. People feel a lot of cold spots that actually walk through them. There's like gusts of wind inside, but anymore, who knows? That could just be because everything's falling apart and there's
Oh,
cracks and no windows in some areas. There was a legend of a ghost that has been named the Butcher, and the Butcher is said to haunt the prison and has maybe was responsible for the prisoner who died in that cell block or was murdered or killed or something. I don't know. It's an apparition who's pretty violent. I don't know that he does anything to the visitors, but apparently, I don't know. It's a legend. Who knows?
Hmm.
There's also really interesting phantom smoke and cold spots and in the laundry room. And the laundry room had a history of some attacks. And so now there's this, like, they call it a phantom smoke, probably more like a mist. And that is seen in the laundry room. And there's also so there is some smell of smoke. Nobody knows exactly what happened to have that there. And
Wow.
then the warden's house, it's pretty interesting that I guess in the 1940s. Now remember, the warden's house is that structure that is, and I have let's see. Present. I have to share this structure again because it used to be actually a home, and now it's this building. This building overlooks the water, and it was set fairly close to the lighthouse, and it was a place that the guards would go for parties. The warden lived there, and during the 1940s, the guards were there for the Christmas party. And many of the guards saw the apparition of a man in 1800s clothing in the
Wow.
home. And then this person vanished, and the room was super cold. And actually, they said the fire in the stove extinguished
Huh.
when he left. So
Really?
that's pretty interesting to have that
Yeah.
happen. When they said the stove, I don't know if that means a wood stove or a fireplace, but it apparently went out
Still,
when
yeah.
he left. When it left, it took the heat with him. So, and
Wow.
then a lot of guards reported back in the day seeing something with glowing eyes around cell 14D.
Hmm.
So you have that tie in too with what happened in that cell. And then a lot of people who have visited back in the day when it was probably a lot quieter to go visit, people have seen apparitions, have reported the apparitions of not only prisoners, but guards and soldiers. They've seen the soldiers that were there on the island. There's a ghostly image of the original lighthouse that casts its shadow over the bay. Now, I'm not sure, I cannot remember if that lighthouse is gone now. I
Hmm.
don't know, or if they rebuilt it in a different location, but apparently people say that you can actually see the image of the old lighthouse on the water like a shadow, but it's no longer there. So that's
Oh,
pretty
wow.
interesting.
Yeah.
No, I was I was just doing
No.
some research. You talked earlier about 3,000 people being there. The actual population, the count of inmates that would have been there was between 260 and 275, and they only had a staff of 150. So for them to have 3,000 people, that's, clearly today's standards, but I can imagine 350 people out there plus 150 staff or 267, whatever. But when they were completely full, they had 336 inmates out there.
It's crazy. That's
It's
crazy.
just incredible.
Think
Yeah.
about the logistics of you have to ship in fresh water. You have to ship in
Mhm.
all of the food. Of course, they were pumping the sewage out into the harbor, which they would not be allowed to do today. So
No.
you have to deal with the sewage. You have to bring in fresh water, and they'd probably end up piping that. I would imagine now we'd have the
Yeah.
technology to put a pipe on the seafloor and bring it up. Um,
And that's where your electrical would go. That's where your communications would
yeah,
go,
yeah.
you
So they
know.
would probably put pipes. I mean, we have pipes that go across the ocean from continent to continent. That have cables and everything else in them now. So
Mhm.
they would be able to do some of that fairly easily now. A mile and a
Yeah.
half's not that far to go when you consider
Yeah.
intercontinental
Yeah.
stuff that we do. Um, but bringing in, bringing or dealing with the sewage would be huge. And uh, you've got to bring all of the food over, which is that it's not that big a deal. It was all done before. It can be done now.
Yeah.
Uh, Yeah. So, and then there's the last thing is well, there's a couple of things. The clanging noises, there's a lot of clanging noises that go on in there. People experience noises of, there's a lot of the national park employees actually said that they would hear clanging noises like somebody's like banging on bars to try to get out and as soon as they open the door into that particular area, the noises will stop.
Hmm.
So it's not something that's hitting the wind and then, clanging into the bars. It stops and
Right.
starts. And some people experience as soon as they step onto the rock, they will hear just horrible screaming noises, but then it goes away. That could be wind. I don't know.
Yeah.
A lot of wind. I'm always looking for an explanation as to why some of the stuff happens. Sometimes there's just no explanation. And again, we talk about the crying, and then some people believe that the things that have gone on the island boil down to the Native American tribes that I guess they used to occupy that island. Is that correct? Way back?
So they had some natives out there. It was more of a stopping area.
Okay.
But they didn't, it was pretty much uh bird sanctuary.
Okay.
So they could have stopped there, and it didn't look like it was very inviting to stop there. I know there's a beach front on, I want to say, the northwest side. But yeah, they said it was pretty much just birds that lived out there.
Okay. Well, there's a belief that the Native Americans, so it must be from the tribes that were of the people who were prisoners, the Native
Yeah,
Americans who were
I hope
prisoner, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the hope so that they put a curse on the island to get
Oh,
back at, for taking their people, which I
Sure.
would put a curse on it too. I mean,
yeah.
um, so it's pretty interesting because the Native Americans warned that um, there would be supernatural disturbances if you visited the island, and then the one of the first lighthouse keeper was found dead under mysterious circumstances, and they believe his spirit still lingers, and that responsible of some of the noises and clanging and things like that going on. Yeah, so it's pretty interesting. I think
Wow.
the curse is pretty, in my mind, that's a lot of people don't believe in that stuff, but you can put bad juju out there. You really
Yeah,
can. So,
definitely.
yeah.
Yeah. That's
So the whole
crazy.
history of the island is fascinating, from
Yeah.
the early stuff through the prisoners there, through the paranormal. It's pretty fascinating. I
Sure
never
is.
went there with the intent of trying to find anything paranormal, because I just went there with my classes, and it was
Yeah.
pretty interesting though. You do feel feels when you get through in there. You
Yeah.
feel it. So,
Said I've never we went by it one time when I was a kid on the ferry that goes through there, and that was it. That was as close as I ever got. I mean, I'd love to go back, but I don't know if if I even want to go back now,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
So busy. So
yeah,
busy.
that's the thing is I don't think that they probably ever do any private tours anymore. The Park Service, they just can't, they don't have the staff to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Oh,
And they're trying to monopolize on the almighty dollar. So they're letting just tons and tons of people in. I mean, it's unbelievable how many people were there last time I went. I thought, my God, I don't remember. There would be maybe 100 people on the whole island when you
oh,
went,
geez.
but you had the tour guides and the park rangers, and they shuttled groups. So you were never like overwhelmed with people. Everybody
Yeah.
was timed. You spent so many minutes in this part. And then at the end of the day, I think you probably had an hour to mill around on your own. But
Oh,
we were shuttled from area to area. But like I said, that was a long time ago. And it's
Yeah.
unfortunate now that you don't get that experience.
it's
So,
very unfortunate. Yeah.
yeah.
And you
But
talked
anyway,
about those structures out there. And once that stuff goes away, it's not coming back.
no.
And that's maybe good and bad, but it's part of our history
Yeah.
as where we've evolved to today. So
I don't know if anybody who's watching this has seen the movie. I think it was Clint Eastwood, wasn't it? Escape from Alcatraz. Yeah. So one of the last couple of times I had been there was right after they filmed that movie, because they had a cell block and the cafeteria was still painted. It was painted for that movie, and so
Oh.
when you walked in there, it was freshly painted. You could see that. It was pretty cool. But
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching this video. I thought it was really cool. If you have the chance to go. Even though there's throngs of people, who knows how long that'll last. All those structures will
Yeah.
last. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, thanks, and I look forward to doing our next show.
Yeah. Bye,
Okay.
everybody.
Guys.